Hello again, everyone. It's been crazy cloudy here since November. Even the forecasters have gotten it wrong some nights. Tonight's the night. Finally a clear night. Oh, no, not again. But I did manage to get about 3.4 hours of data on this target, the Orion Nebula. Oh, not Ryan Reynolds, the Orion Nebula. No, not Ryan Gosling. Come on, computer. The Orion Nebula. There we go. It sits 1,500 light years from Earth. It's one of the closest nebula, and it's visible in some parts of the naked eye. Today I'll show you the setup, a little bit of processing, and the final results. All coming up next. Alright, here we have the view for Orion tonight, and it'll be up there in the sky, roughly 44-degree maximum point in the sky. It's not too high, but it gives me about a 2-hour window to work with there. Alright, here we are on the dome. I've got the Hyperstar already installed, ready to go, and the 294 camera is up there. In the middle is the filter drawer and my wire holder, custom 3D print as usual here. On the back end, to balance things out, I put on the reducer and throw in a few adapters and my 290 mm cameras on there. So she's all ready. Now we just wait till the moment arrives. Alright, here we are inside the observatory on the software on the computer. I have Stellarium up, and as I've shown in past videos, here's my panoramic view that I've overlaid so I have an idea where everything is at night. I have the view set to 9:30 p.m. Orion gets to be about above 40 degrees, which is pretty much my minimum for deep space targets, and this year it's only getting up to about 42 degrees at its peak. Here is here's a shot of the Orion as we zoom in, Orion Nebula, tonight's target right there. So if I target M42 Orion, I can then switch on the camera perspective and make sure I have it on the right setting, which we're using the Hyperstar and the Edge 11, and there we go. If I have it at this angle, I might have to change the rotation, come outside and change it. This is what we'll end up with, this perspective. I could probably rotate this camera and turn it the whole way around if I want to frame it up differently. But that's the 9:30 position in the sky of my southeast, south-southeast skies. Alright, here we are with Orion M42. Tonight I have the L Pro filter, 2-inch filter in the drawer, and the Hyperstar going on. And this is what we got. I have a sequence. Let's switch the Nina sequence area. I'm doing, trying to get around 310-second exposures and 903-second exposures and about 40 for 1-minute exposures. The durations up here are not right. That should actually say for this target till about 2300 hours or 2330. And I don't know what happened. Something goofy went on here, and it doesn't have the right numbers, so I don't think that's right. That's the sequence area, and I'm dithering every frame with these short exposures. Gain is set to 121, offset at 30, and you can see the transit. Highest point is 44 degrees. I'm at 41 right now, so I'm targeting only going down to about 40 at the most. Over the next 2.5 hours, or 3 maybe, I might try to stretch it a little bit, because clear skies have been few and far between. It's been cloudy for months here. It's rolling along. My guiding is average with the 60 millimeter, or I forget which it is, 50 or 60 millimeter guide scope, getting around 1 degree overall total, which is fine for Hyperstar. I usually get about half that, or a little under half, when I'm doing off-axis guiding. So there we go. We'll see how this turns out in the end. I should also mention I used my focuser, my Rigel nStep, and did autofocusing, and the HFR now is pulling in around 2.88, which is pretty typical. We can take a look at the guiding camera too here, just to see what star it's picked out, and it's guiding at 3.4, it's 3.61 on the star on average, or 3.4, varying there a little bit. Not quite the perfect peak at the top, but good enough for Hyperstar. I'm using a 2-second exposure here. And that's about it. Here's the L Pro, and I'm doing 300-second exposures with Orion. Of course, you see the central core is blown out, but using some HDR techniques, you can combine the longer exposures with the shorter ones to make a more blended image and get those details of the background. I can scroll back here compared to a 60-second exposure. There's 60 seconds. And then way back, 3 seconds. That's before the flip. We had a meridian flip, and now here's the latest 300-second exposure just came back in. Back to 3 second again. And the central core is much less blown out, of course, when you take very short exposures. Alright, now after every imaging session, either at nighttime or with the dome closed in the day, I take flats using the Spike-A-Flat, and I have to use layers of sheet that I put over it to get the Hyperstar sensitivity down, along with the USB adapter, which allows me to really fine-tune and lower the brightness as low as you can go. I did not have good success with sky flats and other tricks. This was the best way to do it. And using the ASI 294, I shoot for around 24,000 ADU, and that seems to do the trick with 3.5 second exposures. So what I'll do is I'll just cover that with a blanket as extra light blockage. There isn't much light leaking in here. The screen I turn off when I do the dark flats. So I do flats, 30 of them, and then 30 dark flats using Nina. Alright, so before we can process anything, we have to integrate each set of lights. 60 seconds, 10 seconds, 3 seconds, oh I forgot the 300 second, over various days. So to do that, I use the batch pre-processing script. This is the newest one. Now you have to be careful when you add lights. If you had the filter set wrong in Nina in this example, it showed up as L Enhance. That's not what we want it to show as. So I'll reset that. Or wait, remove that rather. Do a custom lights. So I know I was using the L Pro and I goofed and had the wrong thing in Nina's settings. So I type in L Pro, the beginning of 1, and this is going to be 3 second exposure time. Oops. And now we add the files. Now I'm only going to add 1 date's worth of files, but you would add each date and combine them all into one processing integration for each set of exposures. But just for a quick tutorial, right here I've added all of the 3 seconds from that date, And now we go to flats, and I'm going to do the same custom in my case because I goofed. Make sure I'm putting a custom flat, typing in L Pro again, exactly the same spelling. And now this was 3.2 second for the flats. And in this case I have a master flat. Now with the new weighted batch preprocessing script, you have to put the word master in the folder or the file. So I had to add master here. And it detects a master flat. Great, that's what we want. Now we go to darks. I add the master dark flat. And I can just add it right like that, and that works fine. Now I have to add the actual dark. I find my master flat that matches the. I find my master dark that matches the 121 gain minus 10 for the temperature and 30 offset. And there it is. And it says master dark in it, so it should detect it as a master dark. So now we have both the master dark flat and master dark. Flats, lights, everything is set. Check the integration parameters and make sure this is on average, because there's a ton of files, so you want average. And the output directory is already set. On the diagnostics. And I have to go to the control panel and make sure these all line up. This needs to be checked off for CFA image, and I check off separate CFA flat scaling. And for lights, set that to RGGB for the 294 MC Pro. And now we get everything lined up correctly. That's what the calibration flow diagram should look like. And there's the diagnostic with no errors now. We can ignore the bias because we're using dark flats. Run that, and you do it for each set of exposures combined, and then you'll have, in my case, 4 different images. Okay, after the lengthy process of going through and integrating each of the different exposure lengths, we now have them all open. The 300 second one looks a little different than the others, I think, due to the oversaturation in my area, but it still works out in the end, as you'll see. So now that we have the 4 images done, we have to do the star align, and to do that you go in and add all the frames here, but we pick out the reference image, and I'm going with the 300 second one as the reference image, and I chose the view. You can either go by file or by view, and then I've already added in the files here, or not the files but the views rather, for the 60, 10, and 3 second integrations that are open on the screen. And once you do that, and it does the star align and generates, I'll just go ahead and run through it again here. It generates registered frames. Now if we were to hold one of these registered star align images over top of the 300 second, you would see that the stars line up. And that's what we want. We want the stars to be aligned before we go on and do what's called the HDR composition. So now that we have that, we have everything we need to do the HDR composition. So we open up HDR composition and we add in all of the files. The original 300 second one. I have my 60 registered one from the star alignment and 10 second set, and my 3 second set. And for this, I had to play around with the binarizing threshold. I had to lower it a bit from the default. Default was, it was 0.8 was the default. Let me close that and go back in. I ended up with 0.57, so I had to play around with that or it didn't look right. And I left everything else at default. It goes through and it will generate your HDR image. You hit the Apply Global button, comes the HDR image that's generated from all 4 stacked sets. First step on the HDR image would be to crop the image, get rid of the stacking artifact. Now it's harder to see here where the line is at the top and bottom. I'm just going to approximate it for this one. Good enough. And now we hit the checkbox here on dynamic crop. And it takes care of the cropping. And the next step in my workflow that I do, I don't do all of these icons you see here on the right. I only do probably 10 of them, if that. But here's DBE, it's the next step. I've already placed points. I'm going to move around here, make sure there are no stars in the backdrop, no nebulosity if we can avoid it. It's harder to see here with the image right now. This is our linear image, I believe. Sometimes I get the terminology reversed here. And some stars in the back of that sample, so I want to kind of move it over. There we go. What you can do there. There. I like to place them along the bottom edge and the sides, just to kind of catch everything from top to bottom. Move him down away from the star there. Check that sample. And then you can cycle through the samples like this. There's 25 of them right now. Looks like number 20 is in need of a move. I have this button here selected. This allows me to see that sample, and it's right there. So I just move it a little bit. Keep going. Let's go 19. Alright, now I did increase the default sample radius to 19. That's the only thing I did differently. I have it on subtraction, replace target image, and go. Alright, so that's what it did in the background. Let's close. I'm going to save that for now. Close that and stretch that. There we go. That's pretty good. You can see a lot of nebulosity going on here in the background. Looking pretty good. So the next step would be to do background neutralization, which technically DBE already does, but we'll try it anyway. Sometimes you can have a little luck doing it in addition to DBE. I'm going to select the main view. Actually, I'm going to rename this HDR_DBE. And now pick the target image of HDR_DBE. I'm going to create a region of interest background, new preview mode, and not the nebulosity. Somewhere up here would be nice. Yeah, how about right there? Region of interest from preview. Selecting the preview and running it. Alright, so let's see what we got. How'd that work out? Close that guy. Let's kick it back a notch. Back. And then forward. A little bit. So it was useful. Background neutralization. Next step, photometric color calibration. The first thing I do is I click on Acquire from Image, and it's going to give you that warning. So to get around that, I open one of the frames from my set. And let's choose that one. Acquire from Image, got the data. Great. Now I can close that. back to our image. Leaving everything as set, we drag it. I like to just do that. And now it'll run through. I'd like to point out that, as you can see, the core here was still pretty well blown out, and you're thinking, wow, you did HDR composition, shouldn't that cure it? Well, no, it doesn't entirely. Later steps will take care of that, and you'll see that in the end. HDR composition just helps bring out more of everything else while being able to reduce the core in the end. And here's the result of photometric calibration. Let's go back to see what it looked like prior. There we go. And now photometric. So looking good. At this point we've done several of the steps, and we'll move on to the next. The next step is to run SCNR, and that will help to remove any green from the background, which I've never really had much of an impact using SCNR on any of my ASI 294 images, but I run it anyway. And we can step back, forth, back, and forth. You can't really see any difference, but it's been run. That's fine. Okay, so at this point I want to save the file. I've given it some more names of the processes that have been run, most of them anyway. And I'm going to save it. There's the default 32-bit. Before we can do any noise reduction in the background, we need to apply a luminance mask. We do this by clicking the luminance button up here. And it's a black and white image, basically, grayscale. And we need to stretch this image before we apply it as a mask. So we open up screen transfer function. We also take away stretch, put it back there, go into the histogram transformation. We drag it over to the bottom of that guy, reset the screen transfer, and now drag the histogram, which has the settings from the screen transfer function, right back onto the image. So now it's been stretched. And we can take that and apply it as a mask. Everything in red is protected. Now in this case we want to protect just the nebulosity, so we go up here to mask and do invert on the mask. And now we're protecting the stars and the nebulosity. And we can turn off or hit show mask so we don't have it in the way for doing multiscale linear transform. I have created a preview area so we can see the background noise reduction as it occurs. And now I've opened up multiscale linear transform using my previous settings, which are going to be too much. And as you'll see, I'll scale this down a bit so we don't have this pixelated mess. We're going after just a subtle change from before to after. Now to do that, I just found that if I got rid of all but the third layer, we had a much better result. It's thinking right now. Okay, now we can see before, after, before, that's the before image, after. Just a slight reduction in noise. So I can close that and come back to the main image and drag it on over. All this point we need to remove the mask for now. You can see the mask is active because of the brown tab here. Mask, and then disable the mask. And there we go. The mask is no longer in play. At this point we've been dealing with our image as a linear image for things like cropping, screen transfer functions, and other things like deconvolution, which we're not going to do for this image to tone down the core brightness. We will use HDRMultiscaleTransform and curves for that. So we need to go nonlinear to get into those types of things, such as local histogram equalization and the HDRMultiscaleTransform. Okay, open up the screen transfer function and the histogram transformation. I remove the stretch, but hit the nuclear button on screen transfer function, and then drag the triangle to the bottom of the histogram transformation. Now we hit reset on screen transfer function and drag it over to the image. And now we are non-linear. Next up is the HDRMultiscaleTransform. Here I have the default number of layers set to 6. The more layers, the less extreme of a transform you get. And I'm going to apply it to the image and we'll see how this works out. And as you can see, that really toned down the core and brought out the details. And you don't want to go too extreme or it'll start to look weird. So we're going to try 6, but let's go back and try 8. And there, that's a more in-between result, so I'm going to go with that. Next we're going to extract the luminance again, and this time it'll already be stretched, so we won't need to stretch it. And we are going to open up LRGB Combine. Alright, so we have the LRG combination box up. Make sure you're selecting the RGB window and choosing the correct luminance mask. And the lower the number of saturation, the more color you get. So I'm starting with 0.35, and I've already done this, so I'm going to step forward. And you can see the color increases slightly. So we'll go back, and I'm going to increase that to 0.30. Now as you increase saturation, you can end up with artifacts around bright areas, so you don't want to go too extreme. And there we go. Step it back and forward. That's looking pretty good. Curves can kind of increase that as well. And there's a result of 0.26, and that's the one I'm going to stick with, bringing out some of the dust lanes a little more clearly. And next up, we're going to use a range selection to generate a mask so we don't affect anything that isn't nebulosity this time, because we're going to use local histogram equalization to bring out some more detail. So we can hit the preview button here and take a look at what we've got. We'll start with the lower limit and increase it, trying to avoid losing the dust lanes, but protecting the main areas and allowing the background and stars in the background to be affected by the local histogram equalization or curves or whatever else we throw at it in the next 2 steps. Sometimes it helps to have the image there so you can have more of a reference to where everything is. And that looks pretty good right about there. Try that. Close that, and now we have a range mask. And we'll drag that over to here on the left-hand side. Let me close that. I'm not ready for that just yet. I don't have the mask enabled to be able to see it. There we go. So red is being protected. In this case, we want to invert. Invert is Control-Shift-I, or just click it in the menu. And now there is what we are protecting. And actually, we don't want the invert for this one, so we want to invert that back to where we had it. And turn off the show mask. Minimize this guy. And we're ready for LHE. Now, at first, it is going to look crazy, so we don't want to do too much. There we go. All right, so kernel radius 82 is what I have this one already preset at. Now, as you can see, when you do it that much, it really becomes crazy looking. So after playing around with the sliders for a minute, reduce the amount by a great deal, and kernel radius is around 64. Here's it on, off, and back on. And that is what we're after. So now we can apply this to the main image. And again, before and after. Brings out a little bit more pop to the image. Tweak the LHE a little notch higher, and that's the end result. A little sharper, or a little more detail. Next up is playing with the curves. Oops, preview window. There, back to the beginning there. Alright, yeah. Well, that's interesting just to see how that can work. Keeping the mask on, protecting the nebulosity can bring out more of the nebulosity and lower the background brightness a bit. Before and then after. Last step is optional that I do sometimes, and that's the UnsharpMask. And we can see this one on the fly. Those off, on, off, a bit blurry, on. It does indeed sharpen it, but you don't want to go too crazy. So let's drop this back to 0.66. Alright, so here's off, and there's on. Off, on. Let's just do a before and after. Before and after. Before, after. And there we go. And that is kind of what you get for the final image. Just a little addendum, this ended up being my final image. Increased the color and the background a bit to bring out the nebulosity. I am not a PixInsight professional yet, so anything constructive criticism is welcome. And feel free to subscribe if you like what you saw today.